Hey everybody, my name is Rekha Rawat and I am a systems engineering manager at Cisco. And believe it or not, 2 nights ago I was told that you have to come in and moderate a panel on routing security. And then when we talk of security and routing, right, there are various domains. And maybe with a show of hands, how many of you are coming here for the very first time? Or, okay, how many of you have been over like 20 times, 10 years, a decade? So you see the spectrum we're trying to cover. And then in my household, when we talk about, setting up a Wi-Fi router, my husband goes, oh, that's her domain. And then we come down, zero in on these guys. And they are the ones who are actually securing our networks, the domains between networks, some of which have national security ramifications, right, if they fat finger something. So a lot is riding on these shoulders. So without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce them. And once we do that, I'll just set up a few housekeeping roles so we know when to ask questions and things of that sort. So I will start from the gentleman on my very left, Doug Midori. So he is what is called the man who can see the internet. That's what the Washington Post referred to him as. So I'll let him talk more about his experience, but he's the guy who knows all about internet infrastructure, the analysis. In fact, that's the division that he heads up at Oracle. So you want to say a few words about what you do?
Yeah, sure. So for going back over 10 years, I worked with Jim Cowie at Renesas. We did a lot of BGP analysis, a lot of internet measurement, and we have been breaking stories about whether it's routing security, submarine cable cuts or breaks, any kind of. We've been doing that for a number of years, and in the last few years, trying to figure out how we can contribute our analytical ability to improving operational routing security. And there's been a number of initiatives that we've been doing in the last couple of years that like to make things better. Okay, and then just to kind of inject a little fun in the game, tell us a fun fact about yourself that we don't know. Fun fact, you asked for this. And this is something that they've not been coached on, so it's really putting them on the spot here. Let's see. Boy. Let's see. So I have a wife and 2 boys, and we are temporarily in Spain learning Spanish, and my wife's a Spanish teacher, so we've got the boys in a class, and so it's I'm working on it too. I haven't learned as much as they have. I've been pretty busy with work, but. So next time I meet you, hola español. Yeah. That's what I'm going to say. Okay. Then we move on to somebody who's from the academia, from DePaul University, Jon Christopher. He's a combination of several personalities. He's a scientist, a network architect, completing his PhD in the University of Illinois. And I'll hand it over to you to tell us the rest.
I guess my experience has been largely more on the customer edge, perhaps, than the provider edge, except for one stint I did in between. I've actually completed a routing loop recently. I worked at DePaul University many years ago, went to Northwestern, then I went to Ultra DNS, then I went to Team Cymru, and I came back to DePaul. So I don't know if my TTL is expired or not, if I can get out of that loop. If you look at, I should probably comment, by the way, that picture of me up on the screen was taken just the other day. It's a real recent picture. But my background in routing security is somewhat varied, but it's been from that perspective. One of the things that I've probably spent a fair amount of time on that I think maybe some of you will be familiar with is some of the things that you would have seen from like Team Cymru, like the router configuration templates, that kind of stuff. I had done a version of something called control plane policing document when Cisco first introduced that. And if any of you remember when Cisco first came out with control plane policing, that was a pain. It was very difficult to implement, so I did some of that. I've done some multicast-related security stuff. Anyone do multicast anymore? Raise your hands. Like 3 people. Oh, well, there's actually a few. Okay. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so that's my perspective now. As I'm getting more into research, doing my PhD, I'm starting to do somewhat more leading edge stuff, I guess, so to speak, with the RPGI. If you were here about an hour and a half ago, you would have saw me talk about some of that.
And what is it that we don't know about you?
I guess probably what most of you don't know is that I'm actually a big blues fan. So, and I actually play. If you kept me out late enough and got me into a blues bar, maybe you will get to see me play. We'll see if that actually happens this week or not.
What instrument do you play?
Blues harp harmonica for the layman.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. And now we'll move on to somebody which I'm sure many in the room recognize. You're completing what, almost 2 decades at AT&T now?
Close, yeah.
Close, yeah, right? So please meet Nimron Levi. He's all things security, whether it is running fire drills, doing peering, figuring out DDoS mitigation at the core, at the periphery. I think talking to him, I definitely got the impression that his expertise runs not only deep, but also across the board. And then I will let him say a few words about his experience.
So I've been at AT&T since late 2001 or so. I've been doing a lot of work on our IBGP control plane, helping manage that. I've been managing the peering edge since about 2005, doing a lot of changes with maintaining our routing policy on the peering edge and also some with the customer edge. We recently, well, not so recently, about a year ago, we started dropping RPGI invalids, which was pretty exciting. You guys may have heard of that. I also help manage our DDoS product from a routing perspective, managing the routing implementation for how we handle DDoS traffic on that platform. So just a little bit of this and that, and but recently a lot of focus on things like routing sanity and keeping things like RPGI invalids and other things that don't belong on the global internet in our global routing tables out.
Okay, thank you. And sitting very close to me is the CTO from Aaron, Mark Costas. A lot of you must have heard him speak, and he is also scheduled to deliver a workshop tomorrow. He runs a big operations and engineering team and whatever responsibilities are associated with it, but he's big on the working with the standards and with industrial conferences as well. So I'll let you add to that.
Sure. So some of you are probably familiar with network solutions, and that's where I first started cutting my teeth with network information centers. That started in 1991. I ran the internet. And I became, that was part of Network Solutions. A company called VeriSign bought us in 1999-ish. And I became Vice President of Research at VeriSign and dealt a lot with DNSSEC during that time. I also ran a couple of root servers, A and J. So I have a little bit of knowledge about that as well. And also then came to Aaron in 2007. To help run engineering for Aaron, and have been doing so since.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're ready to dive into the discussion. We understand that I think our session is the one between you guys and the beer and gear that is being set up outside, so we would like to finish it on time. So I think we kind of decided that we will not take questions as the panelists are asking, but we will definitely deserve a good 15-20 minutes towards the end. So you guys can come over to one of these mics stationed around the room, and then we'll take up your questions. So when I was thinking about what is it that I'm going to quiz them on, so my thoughts went back to what I tell my team, that yes, we have a lot of expertise in a certain given domain, but then there are certain things in life, right, that don't require talent. You just do them, like showing up on time, raising your hand, so on and so forth. So I want to start from those basics, and maybe I'll start with you, Nimrod, that when we are trying to secure the perimeters of our network, trying to protect our assets, making sure that if you're communicating with somebody on the outside, it happens in the right fashion, without unwanted hijacking or those kind of malice in the network. What are those basic things that we need to take care of. And the reason I ask this is because, like, for example, if somebody was just starting off as a network operator, like maybe a few months, a few years into the role, what are the low-hanging fruit that they can address? And a lot of things would be taken care of by itself.
So, a lot of things that we do, just kind of that we've been doing for a lot of time, for a lot of years, that we just take for granted. Maybe somebody who's just getting started with putting up a BGP session and starting to buy transit or whatever they're doing, they maybe don't think about things like filtering bogons, or which to get rid of that. Don't accept RFC 1918 space. Don't accept things that shouldn't be there. But also things like filtering those same things outbound, because you may be doing things inside your network that don't belong, being broadcast out. So you don't always think about filtering things, filtering on your outbound as much. You may think about, these are the things that I want to send out to my transit, these are my routes that I want to advertise, but you may not think about explicitly dropping things that you maybe want to keep internally, or that maybe you've injected by accident, even that you shouldn't broadcast. You don't want to rely on your upstream to reject it. You want to reject it and not send it out.
And I heard you mention the term bogons. What exactly does it mean? Like
RFC 1918 space, which is designated private address space that is intended internal use only. You don't want to send those things out. Just general things that don't belong, maybe unallocated space that doesn't belong externally.
There's also RFC 60, 65, 98. There's a 100 dot address space also.
The 100.64, I think.
Yeah, that's right. That's another one that gets leaked out a lot. And should be included in your list of things being filtered.
Yep.
I'm curious, do you recommend that people use a BGP process to do that? Like one of the companies I used to work for offers a feed so that you don't have to maintain manual filters. Is that something that people ought to do or not?
It's a loaded question.
The follow-up question is, would you want to trust that from somebody else that you don't necessarily have a contractual relationship with?
Right. So I guess it depends how deeply you want to filter those bogons and how much of unallocated space, because I think there's a full bogon list that has the entire set of space that's not allocated, because all of the RIRs publish what's been allocated. So you can also drop things that explicitly haven't been allocated. The stuff that I was kind of talking about, the 1918 space and the 100 dot that got mentioned, those are very static kinds of things, and so you don't necessarily need an external feed to maintain those. It doesn't require a lot of maintenance. You build that filter once, and you don't have to worry about it.
Is that sufficient?
Generally. Is it sufficient? That's kind of subjective, I think. For most things, it does a pretty good job. And I guess it depends on how complete we really think we need to be to try and make sure that we're not routing space that hasn't been allocated. There are lots of bad actors that I'm sure Doug can comment on, that people squatting on IP space that hasn't been assigned. It's a subjective question, whether that's sufficient or not, I think.
So that's something that came up in our conversation too, Doug, that with this IP addressing space kind of becoming such prime real estate, you have people, just kind of sweeping in and hoping to gain from those, evaluation. So what do you see from your lens, and
Sure.
what are some of those mitigations that
I have,
you can do?
as a professional analyst of BGP data, looking at it every day, I see there's some trends that are worth talking about. And so the measures that we're talking about of how to implement routing security kind of fall into a couple buckets. One is what are the things you can do to guard yourself, your own assets, whether that's creating rows to enable other people to protect your stuff, monitoring your address space. And then there's also, I don't want to be a vector for a leak or hijack or something that's going to take somebody else out. And I think those are two discrete buckets. But in that first bucket of monitoring stuff, I think it's getting more and more important that people monitor not just what you're routed or what you're presently routing, but if you've got stuff that's assigned to you, that you own, that you're not routing, you ought to be monitoring that as well, because with the current state of V4 exhaustion and the value of V4, there are a lot of actors out there that are by hook or crook trying to get access to control of V4 to sell or lease. There's a lot of money in that right now, and it's the incentives are going up. So I think you want to watch your stuff because people are going to be trying to take it out from under you if you're not controlling it.
Okay, thank you.
I guess the other answer to your question there, John, is that whether you would trust, that third party. It's really a question of risk. Do you want to accept that risk? Do you want to trust that third party that you don't necessarily have that agreement with? And by and large, they're very good, right? They're taking that data from the RIRs, but it's to your organization's risk tolerance, I think.
So does that mean that like if we are getting routes from third parties with which we don't have a direct peering relationship?
Well, no. So the question was there's this full Bogon list that Team Cymru publishes that has all of those the unallocated space. Would you take that information from them and build that into your filters that you would explicitly not accept any of those? Mm-hmm. And you don't have a direct relationship with them. You're just taking that data, okay, and pulling that into your filters.
Okay, I see. And then, like the stuff that you guys have, we've discussed so far is around what are those measures that we take, right, to kind of secure our network. But then, if we kind of go into the complexity of it, then we kind of get into the arena that you talked about, right, the RPGI stuff. So maybe you can just give us a little refresher of what exactly it is.
Sure. So one of the things that's been discussed is hijacking IP space. And one of the easier ways of doing this is actually going to an upstream ISP that would just say, yeah, I'll take whatever you have to give, and I'll go ahead and route that. And other ISPs actually will pick that up. RPGI is one of the technologies that's emerging right now to start that process of clamping that down. So, and this is something that's been vetted, something that's been around for a little bit, and is now getting some traction in the marketplace. So we've had multiple talks over both yesterday and today about these things, so you're starting to see it. So I encourage you to start playing with RPGI. In fact, we will have a session tomorrow morning at 10:30. So you can actually issue or create your own ROAS. And you can set it in an OT&E environment that we have, so it doesn't affect production as long as you have an Aaron Online account. So I encourage you to actually start practicing with this, and so that you can see how easy it really is. So there's a lot of crypto and stuff behind it, but we try to make it really easy on you so that you can go ahead and actually start this process underway.
And in terms of when you say emerging, how emerging? Like, what is the kind of footprint we're looking at, and what are the impediments, if at all, it's not being widely embraced by the industry?
Yeah, so there's two different camps out there. One wants to use the Internet Routing Registry, which has been around for a really long time, and there's a number of people I feel very strongly about using the IRR. There's another group that says, hey, this new technology, RPGI, is the answer, and we need to actually work on that. So you have these two camps. One wants to use tried and true, and the other wants to use the sort of new emerging, really cool stuff. And it's sort of in flux right now. And so at Aaron, we are going to support both. So those people who want to use IRR can continue to do so. Those who want to use RPGI can go ahead and use that as well.
But do you see like an emerging trend as to one would eventually phase out and the other would become the dominant?
I would imagine that RPGI will actually dominate things.
For the right reasons, though.
For the right reasons, and frankly, it's not finished yet. So that technology is not done. We do not have path validation with RPGI. So we only have the first step of that, which is origin validation. So the remaining parts are left to be done. They're being actively discussed in the IETF right now. And so we'll see what actually comes out of that. So hopefully someday we'll have implementations that actually will describe what the IETF actually selects, and we'll be able to start playing with that as well.
Do you think, Mark, that RPGI can replace the need for like prefix lists and having lists of knowing, because RPGI, at least today, it just gives you that association between a prefix and an AS. It doesn't seem like a complete replacement for knowing what routes I expect to receive from this downstream.
So that's interesting. So routes you receive from a downstream, how do you do it right now? Do you have an IRR in place to say, hey, let's go ahead and set this up? Do you use letters of authorization to make that happen? What sort of things that you use from space that's not yours that you're willing to route?
So, well, we'd all like to get away from letters of authorization. I think that most of us can agree on that. So we can use RPKI ROAs to duplicate some of that, but not in that online kind of way. Like you can take that information and then use that to build a prefix list.
Yep. So the first stage of this is actually saying, are you the rightful holder of that space?
Right.
And there's been multiple ways of actually doing that. One is, okay, show us that you can do this by creating an entry in RPGI. There's a number of organizations that are making that happen. Another one may be there's an origin AS field in Whois at Aaron. I'm not sure if many of you are aware of that or not, but you can go ahead and you can change that. And you can match it to whatever that ISP says, hey, change this. And it shows, yes, the registry will allow you to make that change happen. So those are two different ways of actually showing that. A third one might be, hey, you have to have your stuff in IRR someplace. So to me, that's a little bit lower bar because you can go to your IRR of choice. That may not be someone that actually puts a lot of effort into validating that. So you're not exactly sure. So anyways, it gives you a couple opportunities outside just the letters of authorization to actually see whether or not that IP space you're getting from a new customer is legit and you should route it.
And is Nanog using RPKI?
Yeah.
Eating your own dog food or not?
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. Our last meeting was in Austin. And before that point, the Nanog meeting space was not secure in any way. And about halfway through the conference, I was called and said, hey, can you come into this room where all the admins are for the Nanog meeting network? And they were kind of nervous because they said, hey, we had this request that we got to have ROA set up for the Aaron meeting network. I don't know how many of you have actually set up these meeting networks before, but they're kind of high pressure events because you go in there, you have a temporal connection, right? You're getting space from an ISP. You're not sure it works. You hope it does. You get there and you've done your tests and everything seems to be okay. You go ahead and fire up all your wireless networks and everything else is making sure it's all okay. Making sure you have your network connections, all's good. And finally the meeting starts and you have an influx of people and you start stressing out your network a little bit. And from a network maintainer's perspective, you're saying, okay, will it hold the load? And we've gotten much better about this over the years than we have recently. But adding this sort of complexity, okay, we're going to add a ROA to the meeting network. Is it going to work? Mark, are you sure? So I sat down with Valerie, and she went through the process of actually creating a ROA. And the network a guy that was there said, Mark, this better work, otherwise it's going to be your head. So I told him...
You're sitting here in one piece, so...
Yeah, I'm still in one piece, so it worked just fine. The meeting today is under RPKI right now. You can go ahead and check it. I did right before I came up here just to make sure. So it's all good to go, and we're using it here. So you are now using RPGI, or you're seeing the benefits of RPGI because your laptops can go out places and people are validating, they know you're coming from the right spot.
Okay, so now I would probably like to, get your opinion, right? Like you kind of, from the analysis perspective, what are the things that you think these internet operators should be doing? Like if it's when you look at the macro picture and they're overlooking?
Oh, yeah, that's kind of what I mentioned earlier of just making sure you're monitoring stuff that you may not be routing, but other people are going to probably take from you if you're not going to route. But let me add another thing that we haven't touched on here is the role that IXPs play in improving routing security. So there's actually been a lot of work in the last couple of years, and some of the credit goes to the Internet Society's Manners initiative around IXP security. But right now, there is a lot of stuff getting rolled out of filtering that's done at route servers on behalf of the members of the exchanges. And these are, I think, when I think of this topic, there's kind of the things that the operators can do, and then there's also the things that the exchanges can do, because these are two big junction points of the internet where lots of messages are passing through. And if you can anywhere you can automate filtering, whether that's implementing the filters Nimrod's talking about, or what you can do at a route server, you can really you can affect a lot of change. And there's whether it's filtering for RPGI or IRR, other types of filtering going on. Just in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of movement there, and I think that's going to again serve to contain these routing incidents that we keep experiencing, and they're hopefully not going to be traversing exchanges as much as they happened in the past.
Do you have anything that you see, Paul, from your perspective, like what the operators are should be stressing more or putting more of an effort?
So, I think we definitely need to continue pushing things out, like peer lock. I know there's been some efforts by ISPs to implement simple things like AS path filters. I think it's great that I'm obviously a big proponent of RPGI and getting these newer technologies out there, but there are still simple things that we can do, like the bogon filtering, like checking too long and too short prefixes, both inbound and outbound, implementing peer lock. It's been talked about a couple of times today, and just getting those kinds of things out there, because those go a really, really long way. And in order to implement those things, you don't need to do yes, RPGI is great, but you need to work on it a little bit. You need to understand your validating caches. You need to get your architecture set up. You need to make sure it works on your routers before you start, dropping your invalids. You want to look at the traffic that's really going to impact. But there's definitely things that pretty much every router out there supports right now, with doing things like AS path filtering for peer lock and things that can be done right now without a whole lot of extra effort. That go a long, long way to secure things.
Yeah, and John, so when we say ASP pending, right, are there any limitations around it? Are there any other protocols that can be used to do filtering around that when we're doing ASP pending?
Well, there's a whole suite of things that we could add on to the low-hanging fruit items that Nimrod was referring to. So, and this, again, may be another subjective thing for different networks, but for instance, you might limit the number of prepends that you will receive on a particular route. And like at DePaul, for instance, I limit that to 20. Or 20 AS path lengths, which some people might seem as somewhat short, but for us that works. We look at other things like bogus ASNs, not just prefixes. So if something has a bogus ASN, it will filter that. There's a few other things that you might do, like drop certain communities that you don't expect to see. There was a paper recently that was kind of interesting, I thought, about someone trying to pass a route on that has a community that might trigger an action on your behalf because you're looking for something simple like a 666, and so you might black hole that route just by seeing that community. So there's things like that you might just sort of strip off and just to kind of clean things up a little bit. There's a whole suite of things, but I think it's very subjective.
Yeah. Okay. You can strip those things off from places where you shouldn't expect to see them. So like from your transit provider, from your peers, you might want to remove those kinds of communities that you would tend to accept from your customers.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And there's one thing that we've always been curious about, right? I think, I don't know, one of you who was speaking yesterday, maybe it was you referred to all those YouTube attacks and those different route manipulation, hijacking, all those incidents. So when such a thing happens, and assuming that more than one ISP is involved, it's occurring across network boundaries, how do you guys put your head together? Like, what happens in that operational war room? We're really curious to know if you, I mean, this is like anybody could take it up, and if you have any stories to share, like, because now we have a proliferation, right? Earlier it just used to be the Charters and the Comcast. Now there's Google, there's Netflix. Like, there are so many other players that are, like have a big impact on these kind of events. So picking up the phone and, hey, I know so and so, does it work anymore? What do you guys do?
That's kind of all we got. Yeah. you got to know people. You ask somebody, and you're like, do you know somebody at Network X? Or if you don't have your own contact, and that still works.
That's why these meetings are so important.
But are you kind of making any kind of a concerted effort to kind of put an operational practice around when such a thing happens? And I don't know.
Kind of informal. It's the value of these meetings. That people get to know each other.
Unfortunately, that's one of those hard problems to solve. No matter there have been efforts, I think, to try and change some of that, but unfortunately, it sometimes, a lot of times, comes down to the people that you meet here at NANOG. I know somebody over at this other network that they can help solve this problem.
So what was interesting to me is hearing Martin's talk where he actually had to call the person. And I was very happy to hear that he used Whois and actually had the right information, and he was able to contact that person to actually at least say, hello, there's a problem here. But there's certainly, we've had multiple cases or initiatives done in the past. One was Woody, a number of years ago, from Packet Clearinghouse, got all these Cisco IP phones and actually gave them to each of the major players. And so we used those for a little bit, and mine was based on my IaaS. So you call my IaaS, and I pick up the phone. Of course, it's in the office, and you have to sleep sometimes, so it doesn't work all the time. So those sort of things were initiatives that were well-intentioned, but just didn't quite work. And we still don't have a really good sort of way to do this today, aside from those people who are considered critical infrastructure and they have secret bat phones. And that's about the only thing that one has right now.
Called IRC.
Right.
My passion is around automation and how things can be improved. Anything that like I believe in that adage, I do it once, I do it twice. If I do it 3 times, then shame on me, because I'm kind of, I could have freed myself up to do a much better task. So in this case, is there any, are you guys making use of any of these new algorithms or any tooling around it? Like, if, for example, some traffic is going on through my network, but it is rogue traffic, something that is getting flagged, or only when things break will we occur? I mean, we're just curious to know.
It depends. Okay. It depends a lot. I tend to think, personally, that most of us are service providers, and our primary goal is to deliver packets. That's kind of what we do. The packet comes in, we want to get it to where it's supposed to go. I try most of the time not to pass too much judgment on the quality of those packets. Is this good or is this bad? There's definitely things that are bad. That really there are protocols that shouldn't be exposed to the open internet. There are things, services that shouldn't be out there. We've seen a lot of amplification reflection attacks on like memcached and SSDP traffic. So those kinds of things make a lot of sense to drop those particular ports. but I try not to do too much of those things, because then you end up in a scenario where, well, we're kind of going there anyway, but most traffic ends up just being TCP 443, HTTPS encrypted. You can't really dig into it anyway. So,
okay, so that's good to know. And I think we are probably getting ready to take questions from the audience pretty soon. But what is the direction in which this routing security paradigm is moving? What is the next thing that what is the next thing that you are seeing on the horizon? And maybe I would like all of you to take a stab at it from your viewpoint.
There's something I was going to maybe pitch, or I'm kind of interested to hear the reaction from the audience about. Is something that I've taken a slight interest in, and I think that may be coming to either augment or maybe even replace the data that we're used to from RIPE and route views, which is normally the screen scraping type of stuff and getting the MRT table dumps. Is this thing called BGP monitoring protocol. How many people are familiar with this technology? Fair number. There seems to be a lot of potential there to use that to do more of the sorts of stuff that you might be interested in, Doug. Some more detailed analysis, especially if we can get the route validation flags into that data, and we can really do some creative analysis, post-mortem types of things, tracing back events and whatnot.
What do you think?
So I kind of, if I could reframe it a little bit, one of the things that we heard from Nimrod is actually dealing with, hey, I just move packets, right? So Aaron is really a small enterprise. And from a small enterprise perspective, I like to see the right packets coming in and the right packets going out. And what scares me is the times, and this happened back in Network Solutions, when in that case it was a DNS hijacking that occurred, as came in the office, there was no traffic to my site at all. And people thought, okay, Mark, you were up half the night, what did you do? But it wasn't me. There was a guy out there who was very upset with Network Solutions and hijacked DNS. And so we received very little, if any, traffic to our site. And it took a day and a half for it basically to sort of go away. Now, same sort of thing could happen with routing as well. Someone could hijack our space or someone else's space, and all of a sudden you are saying, look at me, I don't have any traffic, can you guys help me? And how long will it take to actually get it back into the way, the rightful state? And we've seen cases where, through this, is that, yeah, it takes a little bit of time, but what kind of badness happens in the meantime? And those are sort of things that I'm glad it hasn't happened, and I hope it doesn't happen, but it could. And things like RPGI or using IRR are defenses to keep that sort of thing from occurring. And that's why I think the time is quickly approaching, if not now, to start working these technologies that exist today to get it underway.
Yeah. So I'll qualify what I said a little bit, because we're here talking about keeping routing tables clean and making sure that the routes are correct. Yeah. I did say that I do want to. My goal is to deliver the packets. That's still true. But I will reject routes that are wrong, that are invalid, that are bogans, that are things that shouldn't be there. We don't want those things out there. At the same time, it's kind of not really my place anyway to say that this traffic flow for the most part is good or bad. There are obviously exceptions, like I said, but keeping the routing tables clean is really important, and it goes a long way to making sure that we don't have as much of that junk out there.
Absolutely.
To jump on the badness thing, I feel like in the last couple of years we've been involved in reporting on a couple of cases, whether it's the Route 53 leak, hijack, which was hijacking authoritative DNS servers to basically hijack DNS. And then a couple months later, we saw potentially the similar outfit doing something similar, where they're hijacking, again, self-hosted authoritative name servers to get control of domains belonging to the world's largest payment processing companies. Don't know if that was, how successful any of that was, but the technical stuff was, the routing stuff was successful. But I would think that, we were having a conversation before this panel that, Those are kind of the determined adversary, a sophisticated attack kind of thing. And more broadly, I feel like we're trying to shore up just the bonehead error category. That's still, we're kind of plagued by that. And that's one thing that I think some of these, like the RPGI, like there's some, you could criticize it. I can find a way around this, and like, okay, fine. But that would help us out a lot in this, the bonehead things that happen on a regular basis, because that would be nice to just solve that category and then move on to the determined adversary, where it's going to be a lot trickier to try to completely prevent those scenarios.
Yeah, I think another way to say kind of the same thing is that we've said most of these route leaks are unintentional. Like somebody messes up a keystroke on their typing in the route or whatever. It's and so things happen. But if we can put a lot of these policies in place, we can prevent a lot of the impact from those, and not shoot ourselves in either of our feet. And then we can, like you said, move on to defending against the determined adversaries.
All right, and then in terms of your day-to-day operations or the stuff that you do, what do you think is the thing that is the biggest stumbling block? What is the biggest obstacle that you face, and you wish you could somehow?
I wish people would stop using my address space internally and then leaking it out to the internet. Like 172.0.0.0, that's legitimate IP space that
or 192.128
or 192.128. Legitimate IP space that belongs in my network and is very often confused with RFC 1918 private space, and so people use that stuff internally, and then it leaks out, and then we see it externally, and that's no good. I wish that would stop.
Maybe all of you can weigh in and tell us on what is your pet peeve, right? You wish things would be different.
So one of the things that's happened, especially in RPGI, is we try to make it very simple to end users. But underneath, it's actually a fairly complex crypto engine, set of crypto engines. And one of the other parts is we've made a couple of mistakes in terms of putting this together. We didn't quite get it right the first time, and now we're trying to get it right now, hopefully going forward. And that just is taking time, and I feel like the clock is ticking. And it's good to get this technology out, but it takes its time because it is crypto, and it does involve a lot of work to make sure we get it right. So that's it. That's the big thing I see is the pressure to get this underway, get it out there so that people can really start using it.
Anybody else has anything to add?
Maybe not just specifically on the crypto piece in RPGI, but one of the challenges that I see for us, and it applies maybe to more than just routing, is that there's so much for us to do, like our staff. You need to not only do routing security, whether you do the prefix filtering and the RPGI if you're lucky, but the router security, or locking down the hardware and making sure that the configs have same defaults and all that sort of stuff if they don't. And the staff needs to have the tools to be able to monitor what's normal. It's what I always tell my students is if you have to know what's normal to know when something's broken, right? So there's a lot of tools that aren't always that easy to use. NetFlow is nice and great, but for the average upstart engineer, that's a fairly complicated piece of equipment to get going, or technology. So that all those pieces that you have to do, it's a lot. It's quite a bit of work to do all this stuff. So making it easier would be sort of on my wish list if we could.
Yeah, I would just agree with John that probably the biggest issue, like a lot of these technologies exist, and we're just the limiting factors, people's time. We've got a lot of people are network operators, the guys running the networks are pretty busy, just trying to keep the lights on and keep the business at times, the thin margins. I mean, these guys, you've got a crew of people who know what they're doing, and those guys have no time to spare. So it ends up being it's not laziness. I think these guys just it's competing priorities, and they got to deal with whatever their management asks them to do. Number one, which may be not security, or maybe not the things that we're talking about on this panel. So it ends up being non-technical issues are our biggest obstacle.
Okay. And if like for all the network professionals out there, some of them who already maybe are security experts, or somebody who is thinking of doing a tangent shift or trajectory shift and getting more. What is the one piece of advice you would give? What should they be looking at? Just to, in case they're interested to know more, what is it that you look for? What is the best way for them to learn? And I'll give you each like a couple of seconds, 15 seconds each, so that we can take the audience questions after.
I don't know if the question was, it's hard to hear from this side of the room.
Yeah, I'm saying is any parting piece of advice to folks who are, who are in networking, but maybe not security experts and wanting to, segue into that area?
Just go down the list.
Oh, sure. I'll start. Let's see. I guess I'd go back to you're going to want to monitor your stuff, come up with some way to keep tabs on the resources that belong to you, either from an operational standpoint or from a reputational, if it's an address space that you're not using, but it's going to be used in your name, and you're going to start getting contacted by, why are you sending this traffic or spam to me? And it wasn't actually you doing it. You're going to want to know about that as soon as possible so you could get involved with stopping it. I guess that's an area that I think people can. There's a lot of solutions out there to help there. So my vote would be monitoring.
John?
Doug took my answer, so so my backup answer might be simply to have a handful of friends, like these people on the stage, all those surrounding me and in the audience. That's one of my number one resources for a lot of the success that I've had over the years has been due in no small part to the people who I've been able to call out for help. So those of you who are first-time attendees, don't go away leaving this conference without having met a couple of people that you can maybe call for advice or questions or help.
Yeah, or the NANOG mailing list, even. Yeah.
Sure.
Just to keep echoing the same kinds of things. I mean, know what your baseline is. Know what things are supposed to look like, so that you know when something's wrong. That this prefix shouldn't be routed. So it's a problem if somebody else is routing it, even if it looks like it's coming from you. And implement those best practice filters that we've been talking about, the peer lock and the prefix length and all of those things, and do those outbound, implement those filters outbound as well, so that when somebody in your organization makes that mistake, because it happens to everybody, it happens to all of us, that you don't propagate that outbound.
Thank you.
So one of the interesting things that John says, the community that sort of, we learn from each other, and I think that's really important. The other part that really excites me is when I hear about people who are not in the community but go through extra hoops, try to learn something, and actually are successful of it. I mentioned this in a talk yesterday, but there's this 18-year-old who's just graduating from high school that actually went through hoops to go ahead and start using delegated RPGI. And I got really excited about hearing that, because I thought, this person really wanted to learn something. And this person actually succeeded on something that's fairly complex. Many of us know about it, but this person actually did it. And I thought that was really amazing. And that got me really excited. So those sort of things I hope to hear more about as we go on. From people who are coming up. I mean, I'm starting to get a little bit older, and when I first started this conference like 25 years ago, I was a much different person than I was today. I kind of looked like John in that picture.
You should probably hire that person at Aaron, I think, that way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I think this is the right time. I think that we should invite the audience to see if you have any questions for these guys.
Hi, David Paul Zimmerman, LinkedIn. So the 100.64/10 space is RFC 6598.
6598, I thought that.
There it is.
You were
Thank
close. We use that. I'm on the corporate side of LinkedIn, and we use that extensively for guest networks. And if it ever leaks out, I should be shot, or just retire, or both. So that was a statement, but a real question. Some of my gray hair has been gotten because it's rare to get a fresh IPv4 prefix for your sites. It's all cesspool now, and you're generally getting somebody's old space. And so there's all this history associated with it. And maybe they've returned it to their former provider, but they're still using it privately. So that's a long-winded question of any thoughts from all of you about kind of the dark side of multi-homing, where someone may still be using it private peering, or how do you deal with that when you're acquiring somebody else's space that they're actually still using?
They're not supposed to be using it, right?
Right. They should have given it up, but if you try to go to them, or they're upstream and they're not responding to you, or they're still using it live, it's kind of this, I was about to say dark web, but that's stupid. It's the gray space of all this where they should have given it up, but you will affect them operationally if you start pushing the wrong buttons. How do you deal with this from a operational or securities perspective, or maybe both?
Operationally, somebody's using your space and you need them to stop so that you can use your space. That's kind of the core question, right? That's the core issue.
I guess I'm thinking in terms of space that was trustable from a registration perspective is now effectively untrustable. Mm-hmm. Obviously, at the fringes, you're going to go after them as much as you can, but you're on stage talking about kind of the best practices. How do best practices? RPGI may or may not help this. That's kind of where I'm going with great advice, and then you've got kind of this edge case. Is there a mapping?
So one of the things that CAN does is it gives you the attestation that you do have that space, right? And you can show that your upstreams, if there's any sort of competition going on, hey, I have that space. Can you please help me get this other person to stop announcing that space, if in fact it is being announced? One of the things that Aaron tries to do is before they give out the space, they actually look at the routing tables to make sure it's not there. Not saying that it's always going to be true, but that's certainly something that we try to do before we clean it up and give it, reallocate it to someone else.
That's all the end user upstreams. If it's PI space, that makes sense. If it's PA space, you need all the upstreams to be following kind of that same model that if someone releases it from them, that they're making sure that from what they can see, it's not being used.
Yep.
But if they're using it privately, then everybody else has to sort of follow that.
Right. But there's lots of other kinds of prefixes that not just things that get reused, but there's lots of prefixes that get used internally by lots of organizations that isn't supposed to be used internally. So it's kind of the same, it kind of falls into that same kind of swamp, doesn't it?
I would think so. Would RPKI...
And
we've got a bunch of...
Yeah, could we take the discussion offline because I noticed the lines growing up, but thank you so much,
Who is next?
Whoever was next.
Nope.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Eric Loco from Golden West Telecom. So we use route prepending and prefix size to load balance because we have two separate upstream providers. And we're probably not alone in that, but I keep hearing that, as you're saying, we drop route prepends of X size and don't, be careful with your prefix for the route leaks. What's your suggestion, I guess, on prepend size and, how can we still load balance while keeping those in mind for security?
Can I just go real quick? I'll just say one thing about the prepending topic that I've been talking about is I've been calling this prepending to all. So this is probably not the scenario you're describing if you're just prepending to one of your upstreams. There is a lot, 8.4 or 8.6% of the V4 table is prepended to everybody, which is serves no purpose. There's no traffic engineering benefit, and it's only risk in the event of a routing leak. But the length is another matter, and that'll turn it to John.
I'll simply say that I do a little bit of prepending as well, but you don't need to prepend a whole lot usually, like 2 or 3 times at most usually is sufficient to accomplish what you're trying to do. Most people will probably tell you that ASP prepending is unreliable. Anyways, there may be other knobs that you may be able to have at your disposal from your upstream using community strings, for instance, and they can do some of that load balancing tricks for you. So this is kind of goes back to a little bit that's a little bit more difficult, it's a little bit more complicated to do. The number 20 that I mentioned was just the total number of path length. That was for us, that works. You can't actually, in Juniper, as far as I know still today, you can't say, based on the prepend, like how many prepends, you can't filter on that. You can simply just prepend on length. So you may not even be able to do it.
20 is a long path.
20 is a long path for us, so we decided that was kind of the limit. So I hope you're not prepending that much, I think.
No, I think usually we prepend 4 or 5 times.
Okay. That might be too much, I think, but
I think the point is that you're not doing it consistently. You're not doing it the same prepend to everybody. You're doing some prepends to this upstream and not prepend to that upstream.
Okay.
And that's a different scenario.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Chris. I work for Google. You mentioned both, I think 2 or 3 people mentioned BMP and monitoring BGP. Mm-hmm. I think at Google we do this a bunch. At my previous company we did this a bunch with BMP and BGP. I kind of think everyone does it, but I guess nobody does.
No, not BMP as far as I know. I don't think very many people actually. Who uses BMP? Raise your hand. Not very many people.
Thanks, Paul. I guess, to me, the ability to look at your BGP data, aside from like going to route views, which is a great option, or RIPE, which is also a nice option, looking at your view of the world is important to see how it is you're going to route, either for an enterprise type network or a service provider ISP network or a content network. And it seems like that's not happening. And is it tooling? Is it like, why is this not happening?
I think it would probably be tooling as one good answer. But everyone's not Chris Morrow. I think it goes back to you have...
I don't do this. Somebody else at the company.
Well, we need those people to help everyone else get on board. Come present at NANOC how you do it. Or make them come do it.
And maybe like what things to look for though. It's, you know, that maybe some of the confusion might be, and I'm speculating a little bit here. You know, you can collect this data, but what am I looking for in it? You know, what are the important things? Maybe that's a good presentation. What should I be looking for if I'm collecting that data?
Okay, I have some bullet points on a document that's 10 years old. I'll put them in a presentation for a lightning talk tomorrow.
That's perfect.
Hey guys, I'm Brant from Verizon, and as somebody who has recently had to reevaluate and revamp our routing security, Levi made a great point that peer locking or AS path filtering is a great place to start. It's low-hanging fruit. Even a network with our footprint, it was very quick and easy to deploy, both towards peers and customers. Another great point was that like this forum, this environment, is a great place to learn and pick up this information. While we may be competitors in some respect outside of here, this has been a great learning environment in here as well. So, and the only other point I wanted to make is we didn't get a chance to hear something new about Levi in the beginning, so.
A fun fact about me. So when I'm
all fun.
Yeah, it's all fun, yeah. Yeah, no, I'm not that fun.
I struggled too.
You must be like, what are your hobbies or something that you're doing, right?
So when I'm not doing network things, I help my wife run her veterinary practice.
Nice.
Fun fact.
That's good. You get double brownie points for doing that because it's your wife's practice.
Rüdiger Volk, Deutsche Telekom, RPGI wise guy. There are a couple of comments. One is for actually making progress. I would very much suggest for taking a little bit of effort in making more precise statements about security stuff. Like saying, this network is using RPGI doesn't tell anything. A statement like, the address space of this network is protected by ROAS would be a very clear statement, and it would be something very different from the statement, this network is using RPGI origin validation, to protect it against invalid routes being used. Yes, I agree. One doesn't have to use all that many words as I did right now. But just saying we are using RPKI, everybody should be using RPKI, is to a large extent confusing people, and it is, well, okay, having no security, having illusions about security, and having security are three very different things. And doing imprecise language about security is something that is an easy way to going into illusions about security, and that is not the way forward. So, after that lesson, another thing that I would report and note, and that is there is a lot of benefits to be gained by doing good reporting about routing security and incidents, and, well, okay, looking in particular at the RPKI stuff, having reports to the owners of address spaces, maybe also to operators of ASs, about what is seen in the global routing with RPKI, I think is, well, okay, we actually should spend a little bit more effort on that. One thing that I can report is for my address space that I'm renting essentially from the RIPE NCC, I have in the RPKI support of the RIPE NCC a little checkbox that says, please give me into my mailbox daily reports about strange observations with RPKI origin validation on the globally observed routes for your address space.
Okay, if I may interrupt you, this is a discussion that would be better served online, because I think we're running out of time, if that is okay. Thank you so much. And I think we have time for maybe one more question. We had 2 minutes when I last checked. Would you like to? Yeah, please.
Hi.
Get tall.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's good.
I'm Maria Conte from Georgia Tech. I wanted to ask if, based on your observations, you are seeing some trends or some patterns, so to speak. If you are seeing, for example, the same networks over and over again to be the same offenders behind hijacking events, for example. I'm asking because along the same lines, there was a very recent publication, and I think it came out on IMC 2019, and the researchers found what they called serial hijackers, like networks that are repeatedly found to be involved in hijacking events. And if you have noticed something like that, do you foresee the possibility that in the future there may be some sort of perhaps open or a systematic way to evaluate the reputation of a network?
Sure, I'll take this one. So I'm familiar with the paper, which basically applied some machine learning to various attributes of routing to find, come back and find initially known things, starting with like the bit canal scenarios. This is something I had been involved in reporting on over the years, and then the disconnection of this network, 2 summers ago, that had been for many years announcing just with impunity hijacks of many kinds. So I went back and looked and basically came up with a methodology that you can try to find this type of behavior in other ASs. I guess when I saw that, the detection, I kind of, from my perspective, as someone who sits and looks at these things a lot, and I can find these things. It's not, I didn't need that technology to find it. The issue isn't so much the detection; it's what to do once you find it. So BitCanal is very maybe noteworthy in these a lot of the publications, but it's unusual in the fact that it was actually a time when a bunch of operators and IXs all kind of came together and booted off a bad actor. That part is the really hard part. So you can detect them. I'm sure we can come up with multiple ways to detect these things, but what to do after that is, without any central authority to the internet, no internet police, that's hard work, and it took a lot of personal connections to make to do something with the bit canal scenario. It certainly can be done. I agree. I think their methodology is very novel and interesting. And it's true. It exists. There are ASs with pretty bad reputations, and they kind of come and go. And it's very hard to deal with them. I don't have a great solution.
All right. So thank you so much, Doug, Jon, Nimrod, Mark. Please give it up for them.